Hello, comic fans. Today we are giving you a special edition series in addition to our normal podcast. This will be coming out on Tuesday, which is new release day for manga. The series that we'll be covering is called Pluto. It's a modern take on the classic Astro Boy manga. But the good news is you do not need to read Astro Boy first. You can pick up Pluto Volumes 1 through 8 and read along with us. You can get it from the library on Hoopla. You can read for free online if you go chapter by chapter. And to help us with this, we've tapped a guest host from the podcast Tankobon. It is a manga podcast that covers weekly Shonen Jump in one episode, and then we'll also do a similar book club style deep dive like ours does on a completed manga series. We highly recommend you check out Tankobon if you are into manga or looking to get into manga. They're really entertaining, they know their stuff well, and as you'll hear, leads to great discussion. Without any further ado, here is the Storied Arcs Tankobon crossover. Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And we have a special guest co-host for this special edition.
Hi, my name's Cole. I record normally with the Tankobon Podcast, but joining today for the special episode. So happy to be here.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
We're so excited to have a manga expert. Long story short, a comic creator that I'm very fond of had a tweet on May 3rd this year, and he said, if I was looking to get into manga, what should I get into? And he was bombarded by comic fans giving him manga recommendations. And 2 days later, his name's Jacob Phillips, by the way. You can go look at his Twitter. He was holding this, Pluto Volume 1, and he said, one of the best detective stories I've ever read. I'm a manga fan now. And I was like, well, that's a pretty strong endorsement. And I'd already started reading some manga, which just some shout outs for Tankobon. I read Death Note, reading along with you guys. And that's like the front half of that book is like some of the best storytelling I've ever read. And the back half can drag so much because it was published in, the weekly format, and they're trying to catch everybody up in case it's their first ever chapter. But it was like, oh my gosh, please just take a step forward and move this plot forward. And I think if I didn't have you guys, I probably would have bailed after like book 3 or 4.
I've watched and read Death Note one time before we covered it again, and even in the back half, it was sort of like if we hadn't already committed to this, I might have dropped it. The back half gets tough.
So sad.
I always say like it's probably true for most long running stories, right? Like people don't like the the Game of Thrones TV show ending either. Like it's hard to end something that you've been doing for like 4 or 5 years. But
endings are hard.
Death Note is particularly egregious. It gets pretty bad the last half. So
that being said, I went back like a month later and read the short Tales from the Death Note, and I was like, this is better than the back half of the book. I think he just needed like a week off at some point to like come up for air.
Some of those are pretty fun. And one of the things that I was going to say about Pluto also is digging into this. I have like pretty minimal familiarity with kind of Western comics, outside of like I know what the say X-Men are. But reading Pluto, and I've read Monster, which was, I don't know, it wasn't like his first series, but it might have been one of the first ones to really get pretty popular. Reading those was sort of like, oh, this is something that I think kind of non-manga people would like. Like even reading through Monster, I was like, this is something that if it was a live action series, my wife would like, right?
Yeah.
So I could see this being like a pretty good inroad for say like comics people.
Well, and I think what's interesting specifically about the creator that Mike mentioned, Jacob Phillips, the idea that Pluto is a detective story. Well, I think we'll talk a little bit about it's reframing of a classic Astro Boy story, but it's essentially it's a murder mystery, it's a detective story. It's got noir elements to it, and with specific regard to Jacob Phillips, Jacob Phillips is an illustrator in his own right. He lives in England. He is the son of Sean Phillips, who is a creator that Mike and I have already talked about. Sean Phillips works hand in hand with Ed Brubaker, and they are the two best noir comic makers on the planet. Everything they do has some sort of noir bent, whether it's murder mystery, superhero mystery, detective, whatever it is. The idea that a detective story, a murder mystery story, something that's got following a grizzled cop or something like that, would appeal to him. Makes sense because that's where he's done so much of his work. And so the idea that he would latch on to this story, I think makes a lot of sense. And Cole, I think that goes along with what you're saying there. This idea that Pluto, at least starting off here in these first 2 volumes, a lot of the manga tropes, I think, that people think about when they think about Japanese comics are absent from this book.
Yeah, definitely.
This is much more straightforward. And I think you're right about the idea of it would be appealing to non-manga readers, myself included, as someone who just doesn't read it normally. I read this and think, okay, this is whether it's being intentional or not, of like trying to avoid some of those cliches and archetypes and things that we think about. I don't know if that's it. I don't know if that's the goal or the intent, but it feels obvious to me, even as a non-manga reader, to feel the absence of those things, that this feels more like a quote unquote straightforward story, and I don't mean that in a pejorative to how, quote unquote regular manga is, but it does feel much, it's structured and it's presented, I do think, much more like a Western comic. And again, so I'm not surprised an illustrator like Jacob Phillips, who is well versed and has basically been raised literally. His father's an all-time great.
His whole lifetime, he's been reading.
Second generation. He's second generation. Western comic artist. I can see why this idea would appeal to him, and just the idea that it's also specifically a detective story works for him. And so, I don't know. I'd be curious if that were intentional decision or not. Whether he was just trying to.
I think whoever gave him that recommendation knew him pretty well.
Had to have, yeah.
And I also think the art in this one, which I think we'll talk about, it still kind of knocks me over. So much manga that I read, will sometimes start off really strong on like those first 5 pages, which are kind of functionally your preview page. But then when they get into the story, you can tell they had to speed up the pace a little bit, and they, they'll cut details, because they, from what I understand, writing and illustrating manga is a really tough job, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I don't know what the release schedule for Pluto was, but most kind of the big series that, you would be familiar with, Death Note, Naruto, One Piece, whatever, those come out every single week. And a lot of times it's one person or 2 people doing everything. And so I know that like sometimes for some of the, let's say, series that are geared towards like a more mature audience, like Pluto is, like, Urasawa's other stuff, like Monster, some of those schedules can be a little different. Maybe they're like monthly or bi-monthly. So it could be too that he's got a little more time to,
I think this was
sort of really grind it out.
Monthly.
Okay. Yeah.
Roughly, because it came out September 5th, 2003 to April 4th, 2009. Roughly 6 years, 62 chapters. That's roughly 10.3 chapters per year. Which,
so that, so I mean that puts it on a closer schedule to the way Western comics are done over in North America and Europe or whatnot. The monthly comic release drop.
I wasn't confident enough in my own knowledge of manga release. I mean, I know that like Shonen Jump is Shonen Jump Weekly. Which, by the way, if you're a Shonen Jump Weekly subscriber, that's the other half of what Tankobon covers, right? You guys always have a weekly recap of that would be like if Alex and I went into the comic shop, covered every new title on the shelf that week, and we're doing our like book club style, that's what drew me into your podcast, by the way, was kind of the book club style discussion and approach. And, another series that I read along with you guys, and then I kind of like ran out of money to buy it, but I kept listening, was Assassination Classroom, just because it was super fun.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the issues with, I assume comics are the same way, but one of the issues with manga is, Assassination Classroom is a pretty short series. I think it maybe has around 200 chapters, but it's still 21 volumes. And if each volume is $10, you're sinking $200 to read it. But
yeah.
That's kind of why we do the the Weekly Shonen Jump stuff, because it is so accessible. Those series are all, you have that Shonen Jump subscription. It's $2 a month or something like that.
Excuse me, sir. They raised it to $3.
That's right. Yeah, it's
right after
now.
I subscribed.
Yeah,
yeah. See, right. That's the price creep though, because before it's like, well, it's a monthly comic. Her meaning Batman and Spider-Man. Oh, it's $2.99, and then it's $3.99, and maybe a creator-owned book's like, hey, maybe it's a $4.99 book, and then you buy that one extra cover, that's gonna be an extra $5.99. You're like, well, that's not so bad. That's every month, but okay. But then what about the next week when you're buying the other series? And all of a sudden you're looking down and it's like, okay, that's like $60 a week or $60 a month or something every month. And yeah, these aren't these aren't cheap hobbies.
No. Yeah. It creeps up on you.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah. Although I will say I can store a lot more manga than I can store American comics. Like American comics, we bag and board each issue and put them in these boxes and then stack the boxes and they take up all the space. My manga shelf is just like, it's clean and it's beautiful and they're pretty uniformed in size. So with the exception being, hilariously, Pluto is a little bit bigger. If I compare that to like Spy Family, these Pluto trades are, but they're super nice. And then the other mystery noir manga that I got really into was called Lost Lad London. I don't know if you saw that one. It was a very small press. I just saw the cover art and I thought, oh, that's really cool. Read it, very compelling. And then it came to a very abrupt ending. And I was like, I guess the sales weren't tracking, or I've been like, I don't know how it works, or the artist lost interest. At least they had enough notice that they did wrap the story. But it felt like you had me for like 5 more volumes and you cut it off at 3. So does
that happen as often with manga series? I know that happens all the time in Western comics where book ain't selling. Then all of a sudden, issue 11, they say, oh, next issue, final one, and everything, that last issue, everything happened. You're like, wait. Is this how it really ends? In terms of publication, I mean, does the plug just get pulled on series all the time?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, that's probably like the main kind of discussion point for people that follow Weekly Shonen Jump pretty regularly, is that they're, people say they're pretty cutthroat about how they, how quickly they act, stuff like, oh, they didn't give it much time. I'm sort of the school of thought, like, if they gave you 15 or 16 weeks and it's still just not hitting right, then get like that's a good amount of time. That's a few months, but yeah, it is pretty.
Well, and there's always the next in line, right? I mean, that's the thing.
That's true. There's always
when
somebody
you're
else
gambling on someone at week 16 that hasn't caught yet, and you've got 5 good ones in the pipeline.
Yep.
You like some of that's just pragmatics, but back to Pluto, which is where we want to get started. I find it interesting. I think another reason this book works is that I know the name Astro Boy, and that's it. And I feel like someone who's steeped in Astro Boy, which I believe you were going through, like a lot of the old school Astro Boy stuff, is probably picking up on all extra dimensions of things, but none of them are necessary. I'm totally tracking with the story and the universe without any of that information. And I think Urasawa kind of cringes at this, but people call this book like a dark take on a children's classic. And in comic terms, for me and Alex, I think this is a little bit like when like Frank Miller took Batman to The Dark Knight Returns. And it was like, if you hadn't read Batman since the Golden Era, you remember this 15-cent kids book.
Yeah.
Then you see this really grown up gritty version.
Yeah, there
was more of a ramping up there.
Yeah, there is, but there I think the idea though of taking an existing property or taking a piece of it and putting a more mature spin on it. Yeah, we can debate how much more. I mean, I guess relative to the original Astro Boy, Pluto was significantly more mature. But that idea of putting that twist and spin on a story, revamping it, updating it for a modern day audience, current day readership. There's a long tradition of that. Again, in Western comics, printed out in the States and North America and all that. So to see that idea, I always like seeing things like that too. Kind of the idea of kind of mining an old story, something that I think in this case the creator really loved, like what his favorite Astro Boy story was, and taking, here's what I can do to kind of expand the world, flesh it out more. Like I said, and really update it and make it more relevant. I think it's cool when creators get a chance to do that, and they're allowed to do that. There are Dark Knight Returns is not probably the example I would have gone with. That's a little extreme there. But yeah, there are ideas of taking maybe not side characters but yeah, taking like smaller side stories, kind of one-off things, and deciding, let's go back into this and let's fully tell this story. But you said maybe coming at it from a different perspective, which I think is what we've done here by focusing on the I guess not Astro Boy here in the beginning. Our intro into the story is the detective, is the police, is the murder mystery aspect of it.
Yeah.
A couple things with Astro Boy. Yeah, I have read I think 3 volumes of it, and really like to read Pluto, you just kind of need to know that Astro Boy is a robot.
I think that exists, right? Yeah.
I think it holds up, completely separate from that, because even it's based off of this arc. I think it's called like the greatest robot in the world, the greatest robot on Earth, something like that, which is the most famous Astro Boy arc. And it, even kind of having that background knowledge, Pluto still, even from like the first chapter, it's like, oh, I don't know where this is going, right? Like it really does deviate pretty far. Greatest robot on Earth is still, or maybe Astro Boy in particular, that arc is actually pretty tame compared to the other couple that I've read. It gets kind of weird. It gets kind of dark. It's a little more advanced than you probably think, because in my head, Astro Boy is this kind of like huge, like very influential manga, right? If you interview probably like 10 manga artists, 8 of them are gonna be like, yeah, Astro Boy is like why I make manga. Mm-hmm. So like just from hearing that, I've always kind of assumed it was like old Walt Disney stuff or something like that, where it's like, okay, sure. I can see the influence, but like it's a little crusty to look at, it's a little basic. Mm-hmm. Astro Boy is actually a little it holds up pretty well. Like the art is very simple, the storytelling is very simple, but there's from the American version, they sort of changed the order of it, so you're not really going in the chronological order that it was published. But like from the beginning, there's things where like they capture a dog and then put the dog in like a robot body, so then like it comes back to its master, and it's like, well, this isn't really, it's kind of a Ship of Theseus dog a little bit. Like there's some kind of high level stuff from what you just assume is going to be like basic children's adventure story stuff.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think to me the twist is probably in the old Astro Boy, you probably don't have like just start offing these super robots like at a pretty alarming rate. Well, I assume these are like existing characters that have their own backstories in Astro Boy. And in Pluto, that's just like, no, that one's dead. Like first page. Shortly after that, we get a long, drawn out, really beautiful story. Bam, dead. Mm-hmm. Let's go meet another one. I wonder what's going to happen to him. Bam, dead. It's just like, man, they are not afraid of like high consequence action in this book.
Yeah. So Astro Boy is a little bit. It actually is like that a little bit. Once again, it's weird because Greatest Robot on Earth is kind of the third volume that you get on like the Dark
omnibus.
Horse. Yeah. So Dark Horse published them in English. That's the third one you get. So, you meet Mont Blanc and he's basically immediately killed. You don't get any of the backstory stuff like you do in Pluto. It's just like he's just kind of a robot dude, and then he's gone. Actually, that's one of the things that I really like about Pluto is there's so much kind of love put into their backstories that you don't really get in Astro Boy. They just kind of exist, and they may have been kind of around in other arcs, right? So like it may be a thing that if you've been reading Astro Boy for 8 years, you go to really like Mont Blanc, and then he gets killed.
As you say, because they're being published in English out of order. That
they changed the order up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Basically,
that makes
what
sense.
happened was Tezuka at some point kind of corrected, let's say quote unquote corrected the order, because most of Astro Boy is pretty episodic. You know, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. But so he kind of put them into an order that he thought fit better or flowed better, and that's how it was released. So it could be that Mont Blanc shows back up. I don't really, I don't know. There's 20 something volumes of Astro Boy. I've only read 3, but yeah,
there's 20 omnibuses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, my local shop has the first 3, and I mean, and those are $20 a pop, and that's a lot of story in those.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, 3 omnibuses, $60. Maybe I could do that at some point, you know. But I figured it wouldn't be that fun. I thought it would be kind of crusty and old.
It's a little bit better. It's not Dragon Ball even, but there's something worth reading there. It's worth checking out at least. It's a little bit better than just a history lesson.
Good deal.
It sounds like it ages better than reading some Silver and Golden Age Western comics, which you go back and read those and you're reading them really just for the history lesson, because the style is completely different. The presentation, everything on the page is different. The way that just the books were formatted were different. So you're only almost reading those comics to be like, well, I want to see what the people who are making comics now, like not what their influences were, but it's actually what their influences or influenced by. Like it's 2 steps removed, and it really is just a history lesson. It sounds like Astro Boy holds up a little better than that era there, since we're talking that's the 60s.
I think
started.
So.
Yeah. When it started, yeah. So there we're looking at the second generation, the second age, silver age of comics, which are still sometimes pretty hard to read. So that. Maybe you can go back to read eventually, Mike. Yeah.
I did find you can get Astro Boy on Hoopla.
There you go.
If you don't mind digital reading, you can go find all those omnibuses from the library digitally, and that's certainly cheaper than buying all those omnis. But anyway, we are like quite a few minutes in now without we're touching around Pluto. So let's dive into. I mentioned that we're offing robots, and a strange approach here. We're entering into a story that a savvy reader will know ultimately centers around Astro Boy, but our entry point is this detective who we find out, very quickly is himself a robot, and it's I'm so scared to say it for the first time, but I think I just have to rip it off. It's going to be pronounced Gazik or Gazik.
Either Gazik or Gazette. Yeah, it was one of those.
Or Gazette. Yeah. Okay. I'm not good with German. I'm worse with Japanese, and there's going to be a lot of mispronounced words, and I am sorry to the listeners for that, especially since you'll hear the correct pronunciations in the anime shortly. But we get a vibe very quickly for what this story is going to be like. We get a serial killer who is using these horns at every location. And now, like, I don't watch a lot of serial killer movies, but I feel like when they're leaving a calling card like that, it's some deep down, they want to be discovered. Like, they want credit for all they're doing eventually.
Is that
a fair read?
Yeah, that's the pathology. Yeah. You only do that so someone knows that these are connected. So they right. Everyone
you're
knows that it's the same person. Yeah.
Or you're building a scary identity or something like that.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of wanting to be captured or not. It's wanting to be known.
Yeah. Yes.
Which in their mind, maybe one and the same. It's not about being. Yeah. They don't want to get caught or they want to be famous. They want to be known. They want their name to be remembered. And by doing the same thing over and over again, I think that's what the hope is. So that's what we get with these horns. And this is whether it's a giant robot or it's a human. The person is leaving the same marks over and over again.
Yeah. So we get a little bit of this. By the way, it kills me when they tease us at the beginning of issues and trades with the really beautiful color. Because yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, you really did a nice job on these color pages, and then they just take it away. They're like, no more of that for you. But we enter into Gazik, and one theme that we'll see emerge through both of these trades and as the series continues is his dream sequences. And they start off foggy and they become more and more vivid. At this point, between the three of us, no one has finished this series yet. So I'm really interested to see how these dream sequences are hitting everybody. I'm halfway through 7. Cole's halfway through 5. Alex has just finished volume 2. So normally, I gotta say, full disclosure, normally I don't like dream sequences in like TV shows and such, because I feel like they're sometimes either a little hand-holdy or cheesy, and these ones are working for me. And I'm not sure I can put my finger on why. But yeah, any thoughts on Gazik's dreams?
I like how it is. I don't think it's in these 2 volumes, but it gets expanded on pretty quickly, these dreams things. And, it's a pretty good way that they kind of connect these robots together, I think, are through these sort of like dream sequences. Sometimes it's hard to tell, I will say, like, what are the dreams or what are these weird, almost like the robot's been hacked. They get these kind of visions throughout. So that's a little tricky, but I like the kind of the play between those.
Yeah, no, I like what you said there, Cole, about the way that these robots are connected. The idea that there is potentially something greater there, that they're more than just the 7 most advanced robots, in the world, aka the most deadliest robots in the world, but that there is something greater, whether it's like a hive mind thing or a deeper connection sort of thing. It's one of those common themes in these types of sci-fi stories here, where we're talking about, I guess we can call it AI, right? We can call it artificial intelligence. I'm
pretty sure they use the term AI.
Yeah,
which,
they do. Yeah.
In 2003, that was not something thrown around a lot.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's at the same. Well,
compared to the era of ChatGPT now, where we hear AI 4 billion times a day.
Yeah, it was thrown around in the idea of what we're seeing here. The idea of like fully sentient robots. So we have a different idea of what AI is now. You're right. There's a different context to it, but I mean, where we're talking about, I don't know, I mean, like Blade Runner or Isaac Asimov. We're talking about iRobot. I mean, there are major overtones here in terms of like the 3 laws of robotics. That as Asimov let down. Harm no humans, things like that. The idea that here we have, our cop is a robot. Of course, he knows he's a robot though. But like that's big. That's big Blade Runner vibes. And the fact that he's like sad. He's clearly sad and depressed. Self-loathing detective. So those ideas have been present, but that idea that they're all linked and that there's something greater there, something larger at play. I like that kind of foreshadowing and setup, because it speaks to something greater and larger mission in terms of, and then like maybe just being these as they call them, very pointedly, weapons of mass destruction. Again, you mentioned this started coming out in 2003, and there are very clear overtones of what's happening in the world.
Oh yeah.
Not even it's not even trying to be subtle. It's subtle like a 2x4 across the face in terms of what that Central Asia war was all about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because Dr. Hoffman, who I didn't catch his name until like the end of trade 2, but he's the one who does all the maintenance on Gazik, and then starts advocating for Gazik when he starts to be worried that something's wrong. He quotes Sigmund Freud, always a reliable source, Not really. He says dreams are a manifestation of real events, not the products of imagination. And then you get the little lucid, conscious awake flash to the it'll be 500 Zeus for each one, which starts to pop up more and more and more often. Hoffman's telling him, like, oh, you don't have an imagination. Everything you see, dreams or otherwise, is a memory. And then Gazeke starts to have his memory called into question in the second volume here. By the way, for those listening for the first time, our approach is you read 1 and 2 before listening. We spoil everything in 1 and 2, nothing beyond, just so you're not alarmed by us jumping from
we're not necessarily, we're not going to necessarily go in specific order there. But no, I think what you said there, Mike, is interesting, is the idea of so much in this first 2 chapters, these two volumes, when there is someone who maybe is a little more anti-robot, anti-robotics, anti-AI, one of the constant things, the 2 things they harp on is everything you know or do is programming. Thus you can't learn or create anything, and you have impeccable memory. You remember everything, so the idea of feeling an emotion is non-existent with you because all you have is you're a repository for experience. And both of those start to get questioned there. When we're talking about the idea of creation and inspiration, we see that in the kind of the short interlude with North Number 2 and the idea of music and creation and things like that. And then, Gazeke is talking about, he has this realization that maybe his memory has been tampered with, that he has forgotten something, AKA something has been erased. And he goes to Dr. Hoffman and he starts questioning, has it ever been tampered with? Has it been erased? Because there's evidence that both him and his wife have had something removed from their memory. And so the idea of
right. And when he can't get answers through the official channel, he starts talking to like a street level human cop.
Yeah.
And he's like, we've met before, right? And the guy's like, 3 years ago.
Yeah. And he's
like, oh, that's the period.
Is.
I'm looking for. So he had to try to play it like he wasn't freaking out. I want to spend a lot of time on North Number 2 because I thought that was a brilliant twist. Like when we're following who we think is our protagonist for 3 chapters, and then we go take a 3-chapter
like hard left turn,
to a completely different story. But they would have been a fun, beautiful little standalone 3-piece story by itself. But before we get there, we get our introduction to here's another name, Brow 1589, BRAU.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay, Brow.
He's Hannibal Lecter.
Right. Well, yeah. So, but Gazette takes a trip to meet him. And what I think is curious is he's incarcerated and largely disassembled for at least having been accused of killing a person, which is against robot law. And as he's checking in, Gazeke is, to the prison, he points out to the security guard, he said, that's the difference between robots and humans. Robots make no unnecessary actions. And he's going to see a robot who killed a person. By his own logic, does that mean that whatever reason Brow 1589, did he commit a necessary action in killing? Because we don't know. Was he bent on evil? We do learn that there's nothing wrong with his programming.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
he's described as perfect.
Yeah, they did a diagnostic after the fact, and he's not malfunctioning in any way. So, yeah, what's his deal? Why is he there? Why did he do what he did? Which is part of the reason why they don't clearly they don't want to get rid of him. Why he's still alive. Well, scare quotes. But yeah, he's Hannibal Lecter. They keep him down and locked in the basement, and even that human cop basically warns him you need a protection down there, and obviously, because that doesn't need that. He has special alloy, but he makes some offhanded comment we've lost 4 robots already, as in so they went down to visit him to Brow and didn't come back or came back messed up or whatnot. There's
probably from swapping memory chips.
Yeah,
I feel like this
that.
is what they do in robot nightclubs.
I find it pretty fascinating the way they I'll say like kind of have the how the robots act like humans, I guess. Right? Like they're all described as like perfect, kind of these infallible things. They're making no extra movements, stuff like that. But then Gazit is he's kind of freaked out because his memory is not right, or at least that's what he's kind of led to believe. We're going to meet this robot that in some way has kind of broken these robot laws. And these robot laws are something that gets brought up a lot in Astro Boy. That's kind of the big thing about that series, which is honestly weirdly timely for a series so old, especially now we got to talk about laws about AI or self-driving cars that might just run someone down. But so I think it's kind of funny how human some of the robots feel, while also they do a good job of kind of like walking that line between Gazit. The whole first chapter I thought was a human, right? And then it's revealed that he's not.
Then there's the reveal,
handgun.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
literal handgun.
They do a pretty good job of sort of like wavering between, are these sort of like these perfect mechanical robot things, or is there more to them? Adam or Astro Boy is kind of the same way, right? Like he's very childish in a lot of ways, but also weirdly like analytical. Like sometimes the robots don't really match what they look like, and they're all the way they're talked about too is fun. Also, sometimes they're almost talked about like the way that you would talk about your pets. Right, like they're very they're talking about very like lovingly, but then they're also like they're working alongside like other cops, like they have like normal jobs.
Well, I think it's interesting we say specifically about Adam / Astro Boy is that that comes into play in the second volume there, when he's like he basically walks into like the police station. And on one hand, one guy's like, "Wait, what's this little boy doing here?" And then someone who knows is like, "Listen, dude, like just like come on." And he just looks like that. But there is the idea of that outward appearance, and I think what's and this comes into play in a lot of stories, whether we're talking about Asimov's I, Robot, or a book that Mike and I covered at the end of last year called Not All Robots. The idea that some robots look like robots in this world, and some robots look like humans, and so whether it's Astro Boy, Adam, we'll call him, Brando, Hercules, these guys look like in their walk around form they look like humans, and then you have someone like North Number 2, looks like a robot. The one cop, the robot cop who was destroyed and dies, who was the partner of the one human cop, and then because he goes and talks to that robot cop's wife, they look like robots, and so how does that change, or how does that affect what their interaction is with the world, with the human world, versus someone like Gazit and his wife Helena, who they present as humans. If you didn't know any better, you would think they were humans, and there's a different dynamic in play there. Versus I'm looking right now at the picture of our first look at Brow, as he's like quasi mangled and like speared through the chest, I guess, into the ground, into the wall, so he can't go anywhere. But clearly he looks like a robot. There's no artifice that maybe he was trying to trick anybody. He was a human, which something that Gazit could do, or anyone else. He looks like a robot. So what is that dynamic? And I think there's probably a larger message there too, I think. And the idea that we keep referring back to this like Central Asian war, which is a war fought with robots. And you think about the idea that your soldiers are these like mindless drones literally that go out and fight your wars. You think about, I can't help but think about Star Wars and the idea of the Clone Wars, which really should have been called the Droid Wars. But still, whether they're clones or droids, the idea that they're mass produced, they all look the same, and they're the ones out there that like the cannon fodder, as it were. So, and then here in our world here in Pluto, we have those robots, but then we have like the super special 7 robots, and those are the highly advanced ones, the one that look like humans, look like people. And
which, by the way, it's illegal to make more of.
Yes, yeah.
Like they produced the 7, and then someone passed a law saying, no, this isn't going to go anywhere good.
We can't do that anymore. Yeah, but anytime you have stories about this kind of robotics and AI, there's always that sense of trying to make them more human. Well, like, why are we doing, like, why are we, humanity, the creators, quote unquote, why are we trying to do that? What's the goal of that? Is that to make us feel better, or to make the robots feel better, more accept? Like, what's the motivation for making them seem more human?
Well, that idea is pretty core to Astro Boy as a whole. Like, kind of the origination of Astro Boy is that, I don't remember what the doctor's name is, but, scientist, his son dies.
Yeah.
And so then he creates this robot to look like his son.
It's like Pinocchio kind of thing, right?
Yep. And then ends up discarding Adam because he's a robot, right? He's not human. It's not quite right. So that's been there since chapter 1 of Astro Boy. So I think it's fun the way it is kind of presented in Pluto, and kind of kept going, because like I was mentioning, Pluto is still very different from Astro Boy, right? Like you don't need the backstory to understand Pluto, but I like what parts are kept, or what ideas they've kept kind of stringing along.
Sure, yeah. I guess and the ideas, I have to imagine that's where those are the things he wanted to hold on to, right? The idea, like what are the themes I can bring? Sure, he's going to bring the same character names, but he's got his own story to tell. But you can see where those larger theme lines connect, and say this is still what this is about, or this is still important in the world, even though I'm telling a different story. The major ideas are still there, and I'm sure I mean, the kind of thing that he would be important to him as a creator to leave in, and say to show some level of reverence, I'm sure, and some love for the original, saying like, I understand what this is actually about. And it's not, I don't think in any way changing what the story is about, maybe changing what happens in the story. You can change the details.
It's contrasting it against 2003 instead of 1950 America, or 1950 world.
The world,
and I think that's where it works. He held on to enough to, I think, keep the Astro Boy fans happy with what he did, but he also brings in this new people that are like, I know you weren't part of that conversation, but you're living in this world now. Let me show you how these themes and everything apply to 2003. So he's bringing the characters and the ideas, but he's also bringing fresh material from the world around him, rather than, otherwise it would just be like a bad cover band, right? Yeah. If he was just reduxing a 1960s story in 2003, it's like, why'd you even redo this? Like, we still have the old one. But yeah, just totally new.
One of my other favorite parts of this story so far too is, it's this kind of basic detective, whodunit story, right? Like it's this unknown faceless killer. But if you've read the Astro Boy arc, you sort of know who the killer is, which is actually pretty reminiscent of what he did with his series Monster from, I don't know if it's maybe not chapter 1, but like chapter 4. You kind of know who the bad guy is, right? Like, who the person that's kind of pulling all these strings are. And then there's the mystery behind, like, are they really the person doing this? Is there someone else? What are they going to do next? So it still has that same vibe, even though in Pluto, at least, for quite a while, you don't know who is the person doing these killings, but it still has the same vibe from Monster if you've read Astro Boy, right? Like, it's still in the back of your mind, like, okay, I kind of know who's doing this, but like, are they really? Are they going to change it up? Reading Pluto felt like I got dropped down into like Monster 1,000 years in the future. They're very similar vibes, similar stories. Obviously, the art style is one for one, but so Urasawa does this thing very well of like, you kind of know what's going on, because I'm sure the idea was, he made Pluto knowing that a lot of the Japanese people reading this were pretty familiar with it, right? Like Astro Boy's huge, it's massive.
Yeah.
So like most of the people reading this are coming into it with an idea of like who the monster is, who the killer is. Yeah. So it's funny how that links up with his previous series monster, that like, once again, he from the jump, you know who the bad guy is, who's doing all the stuff, right? Like they show you that person right there in chapter.
Well,
but I think that actually makes for really compelling mystery sometimes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, absolutely.
The rereadability, because if the whole thing is about the reveal of the killer, once you know the killer,
the story's over.
The story's over, and it kind of ruins the story. When with something like Monster or even Pluto here, and he kind of tips his hand and shows you like, this is what's going on.
Yep.
But you're reading it anyway. It means the compelling part is not just the big reveal of the killer. It means there's actual plot going on too.
Yeah. Well, I think there's plot and
sets
character
it apart from pulp mystery.
Yeah. There's this plot and character here. I think what Paul, you said earlier about how, in that original Astro Boy story, at least in the specific story that's being adapted here, you don't get a lot of backstory of some of the other robots. Time is spent with them. But here, like they're going out of their way. We don't get a lot of time with Mont Blanc, but obviously we get the remembrance, the funeral, or whatever the service was about how great Mont Blanc was. Obviously, we get a whole 3 chapters there with North number 2, and everything about that, and the idea of music and creation and inspiration. We see Brando. We spend time with Brando. We see what his life is like, and like he's got a family and kids. Like you're getting so much more into these characters, and I think that's where Urasawa is adding to this story of saying, like, who are the rest of these characters? And if we can get people to care about them, about these other robots, then yeah, the focus isn't about the big dun 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 reveal, because if that's all you build to, if that's the only thing you have story wise to lean on, yeah, it's great maybe the first time, but then like, why do you go back and read it? What's the reason to go back and see it again and again, or read it again and again, if all you have is the reveal? And I think there's a mark of sophisticated storytelling and smart storytelling. Someone who understands what's important, what's truly important in the story, and to the reader. That he can hint at it, or like in terms of like Monster, you can have your reveal really early on, and it's still compelling because there's more to it. It's not just the who, maybe it's the why and the how and all the backstory. It's not just a name and a face. And I think that's what I find compelling about Pluto so far, is knowing that, I guess, knowing that we're going to get to know these robots, and then again, I guess, watch them die. That's a little dark, but the idea that we're going to get all of these characters, and he's already shown through 2 volumes that he's willing to spend time with characters that seemingly aren't our main characters. Implicitly, I think that these other characters outside of, I guess, Gazette, and we now learn is going to be Astro Boy, Adam, that these are some of our main, we're following them, at least for now. These other characters that they're trying to protect, other robots, they can come and they can go, because we've already seen them come and go. So just the idea that we're going to delve into that, I find that compelling, that he's going to put the work in to have the readers have connections with this world and with these characters, these robots, with the full knowledge that the whole point is that they're all going to die. They're all going to be murdered,
Well, he does a really good job of, I think, making you care about the robots too, right? Like all the robots are described like, Mont Blanc, and Brando. Is that the second one? He's the third one. Yeah,
he's the wrestler with the big family. Yeah, Brando.
Yeah, they're all like very noble, right? Like Mont Blanc didn't want that statue put up of him because it'll block the view of the trees. Brando has a similar thing like that too, right? So like, even reading,
and they're all national heroes.
Okay, like.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They're all revered. Yeah.
Yep. They're all national heroes, or like, even kind of talked about like, like a national monument or like something in your area that you really care about, right? Like I live in Lexington, Kentucky, so obviously like horses. Anyone, everyone cares about the horses all the time. It'd be the same way with like, this is your robot. It's like, oh yeah, Brando, he's our guy. We're going to bat for Brando. Yeah. This is our area. This is what we care about. I think that's, Urasawa does a really great job of that.
Well, and I actually, now that you mentioned that, I think about also, we talk about those who are our big 7 super advanced robots. I think he goes out of his way also to have you care about some of the other just regular robots. And I go back to the wife of the one robot cop that dies.
Yeah.
When Gazit offers to share the memory chip of her, I guess, just late husband. Yeah. And basically relives his literal last moments of existing. But there is something incredibly compelling about that you can do with the allegory of robots and the idea of what memory is and what remembrance is we as humans always talk about, the idea, this comforting idea that, the people that we've lost, those loved ones, they don't leave us because they stay with us. Our memory of them is what preserves. And it goes again, that idea of memory for what's memory for robots, it's literal data. So if she can hold on to the actual data chip there, then yeah, it's like in a lot of ways he could still be there. So what does that mean? Is that any different of experience for artificial intelligence than it is for human sentience? I don't know. But the fact that they put time into that character, I think by having her appear twice, by having Gazit go talk to her and like relay the news, and then have the empathy, I guess, to go back and feel like he's doing something good, think in the moment, oh God, I did something wrong, and then be comforted that no, you did the right thing. And all those things are so wildly human, trying to comfort someone through grief, even if this robot isn't experiencing grief the way that we humans think about grief, but still going through that same process. And you have a character trying to console her through that and not knowing what the hell he's doing. Again, all these ways to make these robots, whether they look human or not, feel and act human, the way that it's recognizable to the audience. And I think that's really compelling and interesting.
Yeah. So many thoughts there, because I think the interesting thing that hit me and really drew me in was all of these discussions about what the difference is between a human and a robot, which everyone in this world is obsessed with. The robots are always reflecting on like, I wonder if this is what it's like to have emotion. I wonder if this is what it's like to have a memory. I wonder if this is what it's like to taste things. And the humans are always trying to like gatekeep humanity. Even Dr. Hoffman, who's well-intentioned, says, human memory is a handy thing. We have the function to forget. You can only erase. And I was like, now it's interesting to me what the distinction is between forgetting and erasing. And I think basically it's one of those things like we all know, but it's such a fine point.
It feels semantic. Yeah.
It feels semantic, yet, when I forget something, I can still to some extent recall it. As opposed to something being, erased off of my computer. Although that being said, if we get into the mechanics of how hard drives are written and rewritten and overwritten, technically you can retrieve deleted data off of a hard drive. And we're starting to get the impression that is exactly what's happening to Gazit, because he's getting recall from things that have either been rewritten or overwritten or inserted against his will. So really interesting stuff. And of course, I think now we get to Scotland for North #2, that 4-chapter arc.
3-chapter, right?
3-chapter, yeah.
It
just knocked my socks off the first time I read it, because I was like, he has us going on this mystery and this detective piece, ostensibly for 3 beats. We get a big reveal at the end of 3. Brow says, oh, well, horns in Roman mythology, that was Pluto, the king of the dead. And he's, warns him, he's like, there's 6 more advanced bots. If that's who's being hunted, you're one of them and you're on the list. You end with that and you expect, okay, now a minute. Like, I'm really feeling where this story's going. It's a serial hunter hunting 6 people, including the guy looking into it. And instead, we go to Scotland. We get this curmudgeon of a composer. We get his backstory, how he went blind and why he got into music, all this other stuff. North number 2, trying to get past his trauma from the war and all the terrible memories that he has, by expressing himself through music. And again, the gatekeeping. The saying, you can't hear and appreciate music or art. It's all just data to you. And the way he scoffs at data, he won't enjoy the tea that North number 2 made for him because he's like, there's some art to making tea that you couldn't possibly just memorize from an instruction book. And I'm like, okay, well, now you're holding a standard that most humans couldn't live up to. Although I suspect for this guy, that is consistent. I'm guessing most humans are beneath this guy too.
Probably.
Yep.
Because he's a real piece of work.
Yeah. But, there is, we talk about how this has aged in the 20 years since it was written. The idea of, can AI make art? Can it experience art? Again, it's a completely different version of what we're seeing here. Here he's talking about the idea of inspiration, maybe writing music or appreciating anything like that. But the conversation we have around AI right now, at its fundamental core, is the exact same. I had that too. Yeah.
We're recording this during the writer's strike.
Exactly.
And one of the issues on the table,
writers and actors strike as well. The idea of,
you cannot hand off our writing duties to AI.
Yeah.
And there are artists who are suing AI companies saying this AI was clearly riffing on my stuff. And it's a fascinating conversation because in our world, AI is criticized for like, oh, well, you just took, 10 different things and mashed them all together. And I'm like, okay, but crudely speaking, isn't that how humans create new things too? Like, we're influenced by 10 different writers and then we sit down to write a book and there will be shades of that in there. Be like, oh, when I'm reading a book and I'm like, okay, clearly this guy reads Stephen King. I don't think, oh, he's a cheap robot imitating Stephen King. I'm like, no. He's got a little homage, a little hat tip in there. And so then the shades of difference there. And in the case of Pluto here, it's not just that he wants to imitate the technical ability of music. It's that he has memories and he has feelings and he has the need for self-expression. And he wants the technical ability to do that self-expression. And I'm like, this is a really compelling case for not AI in general, but this AI, the AI in Pluto, really having human status. Yeah, that's how it hit me, or at least we're supposed to find it plausible.
I think so. Yeah, the idea that, at one point they talk about the idea of a law that was passed, like a robotics law that gives robots, agency and I guess equal rights status for the most part with humans. But yeah, in the world that Urasawa is presenting here, he is leading open that possibility, which is why the pushback that North number 2 gets, I think, is supposed to be so vehement and so kind of outrageous, like so blanket, like rejection. I think because we've already been primed a couple volumes in that whether or not you believe a robot can have like pure inspiration or whatnot, but like, why wouldn't you at least teach a robot how to play piano? Like, what's wrong with that part?
Rather destroy the piano.
Yeah.
Wild.
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea that there's having him be so over the top and be so said, I think to reject North number 2 so hard, I think is obviously they're setting up for what that reveal and what that payoff is going to be. But I think it's meant to illustrate this idea of he's having one character point out all of the things that the I guess AI people would say, right? You put them all in the mouth of one character in one story. So as to show this is what the opposition side, we assume that's the opposition side, that this is what everyone on that side would say. He's not the only person, that thinks this way, but the fact that this one character is doing it, and we pit him against this character that I think we're supposed to be automatically empathetic for, right? In North number 2.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked about this little North number 2 arc also is I don't remember if this kind of old man says it or if it's just something that I kind of we'll say like fabricated or came up with, but this idea of like the robots can't make art. To me it's like because they're kind of too perfect, right? Like it's like the difference between it's the difference between like programmed drums or live drums, right? Like my one of my favorite bands is Depeche Mode. They're very use drum machines, all that, but like when you go see them live, they've got Christian Einer just beating the brakes off of the drum kit, and it just sounds it sounds more alive. It sounds I don't know, it's different. I think there's a charm to like, oh, he was a little late pressing the key there, right? Like it's not quite in time, whereas the robot can never, theoretically, the robot can never get there because the robot's always going to be perfect, right? The robots, it's never late hitting. It's it's always on beat. It's always in time. So I find that pretty fascinating as well.
I think most definitely, because I think the argument would be the only way a robot could do that is if you programmed a robot to do that, which is the exact same as if programming the robot to be perfect. That goes to the idea, I think, of, as you were talking about that, I flashed on the Matrix, the idea that what does Agent Smith say to Morpheus? The first Matrix was made to be a perfect society, a perfect world, where no one suffered, no one anything. But you humans rejected that because inherently, his argument was inherently humans define basically their existence through flaws, through problems, through issues. So that's how we know to err is human, right? So that's how we know when something is handmade. When we see a picture, when we talk about like seeing an AI drawing or whatnot, and it just looks uncanny valley. That's what I was thinking of. Uncanny valley for computer graphics. That when you look at that and you're like, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, which is why it totally doesn't work. When there are no flaws, there are no little nicks, and the only way to make us believe it is if there's they're a little late there. That note's a little off. You were a little out of tune, but you brought it back up. That little, the vocal fry or the cracking in the voice when a singer goes for something big, right? Those are the things that we know make it human. And that the idea that AI can't do that, that they can understand what that is. We can program that. They know that this is what it's supposed to sound like, but it can never happen naturally, I guess, because what someone would say would be, well, nothing you do is natural. Everything you do is programming. And that's that kind of fine line between what is true inspiration versus what is the end result of an algorithm or yes, just what the programming is. It comes through. I think where Pluto is trying to land on is the idea that maybe their robots maybe are a little bit different. I think we start seeing that in the second volume when we meet Adam, and because it's like, wait, I can't. My sensors on you are coming up like ambiguous. I don't know. I can't tell right away if you're a robot or a human. And Adam's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the point. It's like I'm the next step there, and we don't really explore that here. I assume that's going to be something explored down the line. The idea of if those lines get more and more blurred. And now we've made robots look like humans, and now once we've made them look like humans, we can't even tell if they're robots or humans through our normal sensors. What does that mean for society as a whole? So I think what Urasawa was trying to point to is that these robots are more than just creations. They're more than just the literal sum of their parts. They are evolving and changing and moving in ways that from a mental capacity, their AI capacity, beyond what is just will be the reductive and say like the ones and zeros of their code.
Right. And when they find Brando's memory chip, if the reductive view was true, wouldn't they just drop that chip in some other shell and it'd be like, oh, we have Brando again?
Yeah, that's Brando.
Right. But that's not how it works. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, I don't exactly understand why that isn't how it works, but those are the rules of the Pluto Astroverse here. Mm-hmm. And you have to respect those that, and everyone acknowledges it. Even the humans who are anti-robots aren't like, well, just put it in a different one, have a new Brando.
I think also, though, I think that there's a recognition there that, whether implicit or not, that these robots are individuals. And it's not, and that you are more than just the memory chip. And actually, when you mentioned the memory chip, what I flashed on was the idea of like his last message is like, I'm going to send you what this guy looks like. You know, in my last moments, you're going to see what this guy is, who this monster is, and then I beat him. And it just flashes of his family. It's his wife, his kids, because in those last moments, again, in a very human aspect, he can't control himself.
Yep.
You know, what's the thing you think of in your last moments? You know, for him, it is his family, it is his loved ones, and it's uncontrollable. He is stating what his goal is. I know I'm about to die, but it's okay because I'm going out a hero, and I'm going to show you who the enemy is, and he can't do it because he's overwhelmed by the love he has for his family, which it is not a thing that we are supposed to think about with robots. That is supposed to be the divide between robots and humans, and that robots don't have that emotion. They don't have that connection. And it's just another example of what Urasawa is doing in his world, saying that even a robot here can't control. He's not trying to think about his family and his
right, and he's not trying to be more human.
Yeah,
he has just become more human.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. He is trying to be a robot there, being like, I'm going to record this last thing. So when you find this, you know what you're up against. You can see what's up, and he can't control it. It is completely involuntary. It is where his mind goes, just as it would for, again, the way we think any I almost said real human. I don't mean whatever. I don't mean to be like, you know, I don't mean to be specious or anything like that. But yeah, the way that we typically see humans depicted in stories, that, you know, that they're the ones who feel and have attachment, and uncontrollable, unexplainable. Why do we do this? It seems irrational why humans act the way they do to people they love and care about. And that's what makes us human. It goes back to the idea that Cole and I were just talking about, the idea of the flaws that make us human. You know, that in this moment here, he's trying to be helpful. He's trying to do what he can, but it's a flaw that his mind can't go to the focus on thing he's trying to focus on, because his subconscious is saying, no, in these final moments, the last thing you're going to see, the last thing you're going to think about are your family, is your wife, is your kids. That's what it's going to be. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. And that's what makes you human. And that's not what makes you a robot. And once again, those lines are just, they're blurred when it comes to these.
Well, and I mean, I think even his decision to go out and try to face the killer was a human decision.
Yeah.
Because the other robots were like, don't do that. Like, no, we can all team up and do this together. Mm-hmm. And he's like, they're not going after my friends. If anyone's a target, it's me. Yeah. And I'm like, that sounds like a soldier from World War II. You know, that does not sound like robot logic to me. Yeah. And he had the foresight to like be broadcasting the whole thing to share as much data as he could.
Exactly. Yes. He had a sense of what he was doing. But yeah, there is a very human, noble sacrifice. The idea of like going out on your sword, being a martyr or something like that. That's at its core illogical. And we always think about robots,
but we can't resist stories
as being
like
pure
that,
logic.
Right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. They're very human stories. But yeah, when it comes to robots and AI, the hallmark is that they're supposed to be completely logical, always logical. You know, you're making the dispassionate, emotionless choice, the detached choice. And what Brando does is the way that it's valorized for centuries, eons in human stories, is that making the sacrifice is because you're doing it for the greater good, or you're doing it for something larger than yourself. I think for him, it's like his family and his friends. He's going to go out there and do it because I'm the biggest, baddest guy out. You know, he's got to come to me anyway, so I'm going to go after him. That kind of attitude is wildly human.
Yes. Yeah. And the type of human that I usually watch with a large bucket of popcorn in the summers. Like that's your summer action hero kind of guy, which is why he became a national hero and a wrestling champion and all this other stuff. There are two other beats that I want to talk about. Obviously, it's open for anything at this point. I think the quickest one, even though it comes closer to the end, is what ruined my bedtime with my daughter last night. I gave her teddy bear and thought of Dr. Roosevelt. And I was like, oh, this is like how clowns have been corrupted by horror. I'm like, oh, and this teddy bear is pretty creepy now. And first of all, I assume he's called Dr. Roosevelt in honor of Theodore Roosevelt, nicknamed Teddy, and he's a teddy bear.
Yeah, that's what
Okay. Okay, good. I don't even want to say what my guess for why he would be named after the other Roosevelt would be. But really enigmatic mystery twist. You don't even see who he's talking to. You just see him pulling strings. And then when the president, I got a little confused the way that was cutting around. That's the president of Thracia who's giving an address, and the bear's behind him.
Yes,
clearly pulling the strings. He cannot move himself. And as Brow says, what do you think a robot who doesn't have motor functions does with all their processing power? Yeah. It's like, oh, that's a pretty horrifying statement, honestly. Which is the taunt, I think, that convinces Gazik to go trade memory chips finally with Brow. And Gazik trades his memory chip twice here. Once with Adam, who runs to the bathroom and cries when he sees, and once with Brow, who is like manic with laughter because he sees exactly what he expected to see, and now starts taunting Gazik with his own memories. So there's something any outside person who has his memory chip can see that he can't.
Yeah, I think we get a sense of maybe why he's like sad, depressed robot cop. Right?
But I don't think he can't even put his finger on it exactly.
He probably can't. He probably can't.
He knows he has war trauma. They've all got war trauma, which, by the way, trauma is not a thing robots have.
Yes. But it's obvious, going back to North number 2, like clearly whatever he's going through, he doesn't want to talk about it, doesn't want to acknowledge it. His solace was through music. That's what he's trying to do. So,
right. And when you watch, or like when you experience trauma, eventually years later, you still have a vivid memory, but it starts to fade a little bit with time. That doesn't happen with a computer's memory. It is just as vivid as when it actually happened. And the deaths of 2,936 or however many robots he killed, each one of them is still vividly with him. When
we flash back to that part of the war there, and I guess it's Mont Blanc, it's Brando and Hercules are talking together, and they're kind of talking like, I think it's Brando and Mont Blanc are talking about like, how many did you kill? And they're both very vague about like, it was blah, blah, blah. And then Hercules comes in and like has the exact number for everybody, which is like total psycho behavior. But
the dwarf from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Weren't they doing a count at the end? And he's like, that counts as one.
Yeah. But the idea that kind of right there, that you see some humanity out of Mont Blanc and Brando during the war, and then you had Hercules who again coming very robotic of like, no, this is our job, this is what we have to do. He had this exact count there, and I think we see. I think that's supposed to play off what we see Hercules later in the present day after he sees what Brando has done and the sacrifice he's made. I think we see a change in a mindset for him as well. But the idea that they're experiencing this trauma, which robots aren't supposed to experience, but they were experiencing as it happened. What they went through was horrific in the war, right. And now they've had to sit and deal with this somehow. And it hasn't,
like
in
humans,
general,
they're
gone
looking
well.
To distract themselves from it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what entertainment is about. We distract ourselves from the banalities of life, but also the pain.
The way they talk about war is pretty fascinating. I think there was a pretty great lecture series on YouTube, and I can't remember the professor's name. This is Yale professor. It's doing a course on Faulkner, Fitzgerald, and Hemingway, and kind of talking about they're all big post World War I writers, the way they talk about war. Like, Fitzgerald and Hemingway both went to war, so the way that they talk about it is kind of like these robots initially, like very vague, very, like they don't really talk about it. There's like, yeah, that it's pretty brutal, that kind of sucked, right? But Faulkner's different. Faulkner didn't go to war, so the way he talks about it is sort of the way the people talk about these robots, like it's heroic, this triumphant thing. So it's this idea that, like, if you were in the war, you can't really see it that way. Sure. Everyone else can. Everyone else has this idea of war as this very, you have these war heroes kind of deal. But if you are that person, you can't see it that way. And it's the same for these robots, which is something I find fascinating, that he kind of brought that over, to the robots. Even they can't kind of escape the these like atrocities of war that they had to experience.
Yeah, that's a great pool. I'm ashamed to say I don't know much Faulkner. Aside from saying that I know Conan O'Brien's undergraduate thesis at Harvard was on Faulkner, and I only knew that because Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor was on his podcast and dug up his paper, because that's how thorough she is. She's like, oh, I'm going on a late night comedian's podcast, I better read his thesis paper from his undergrad. And Conan was like, where did you even get that? Like, I don't have a copy of it. But anyway, huge Faulkner fan there. So Faulkner's been on my list. But that's an interesting perspective. I'd never grouped him with those three and seen the difference. But yeah, it is totally different. Someone who, talks about, I think it was in the Civil War, same thing with like Stephen Crane, right? Red Badge of Courage. Mm-hmm. He went on the front lines. He was not a soldier, but he was there kind of as a journalist, and then wrote a fictional account that was supposed to be the most brutal thing, ever written. And when they made Saving Private Ryan, they were like, hold my beer. Yeah. Or even Platoon. You go back further. So the last plot point that I want to talk about, and I'm not closing it off to other things, is it is amazing to me once Adam enters the story how much he eclipses your attention. And I think he's supposed to, but there's clearly the most voltage with this character, and two things in particular stand out to me. One, his little lunch with Gazik, where he's talking about how he's, kind of forced himself to keep eating ice cream until he enjoys it. It seems like, one, he really has understood how to make this work. Two, I think that's how any of us ever comes to eat kale is, we tell ourselves this is what humans do, and we force ourselves to eat it. And then eventually we feel more human, or also, less human, depending on your take on kale.
The idea that he would have to go to the bathroom, but basically just means periodically getting up and leaving and going to the bathroom.
Yeah. Right.
Again, the idea of trying to mimic human behavior in that way,
to the point where it becomes real.
Yes.
Which probably an obscure reference, but it reminded me of the French guy from the Matrix sequels, the Merovingian, who knew he was living in the Matrix, knew he was a robot or program, but wanted to surround himself with decadence and only wanted to speak in French because he enjoyed all the aesthetics of fine human culture, and the mimicry is where he found meaning. And for Adam, it seems like he acknowledges on one hand what he's doing is kind of silly, but is also finding meaning in it. And it's, I think Oscar Wilde said something about how most people are other people. Hold on. Let me find the quote. Most people are other people. Wilde. It's kind of a snobby quote, but Oscar Wilde, Oh yeah, he said most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives a mimicry. Their passions a quotation. Brutal stuff from Wilde, but
not entirely wrong.
No, it's not. No, it's not wrong at all. Most people's thoughts are someone else's opinions. Absolutely. Their lives a mimicry. Yep. Most of us do, what our parents did, or the opposite of what our parents did because of what our parents did, and their passion's a quotation. I think sometimes in trying to gatekeep like Adam and other bots from being human, we impose standards that no human themselves could live up to. Right?
Well,
like just because he's mimicking human behavior in order to feel more human. Well, lots of humans do that, and we don't question their humanity.
Well, this little stretch with Adam, I think, is where kind of the Astro Boy history really comes into play too. Is that, you know, like I mentioned, his kind of creation, or like his origin story, I guess, is that he was discarded for basically not quite being human enough.
Right.
So then he's taking all these steps because, you know, whatever, you know, deep down there's this desire, like, oh, I wasn't human enough, I was discarded, so I wasn't loved, I gotta act like a human
because I wasn't human enough. Yeah.
So he's like, I gotta pretend to go to the bathroom, you know, the humans eat ice cream, I gotta, you know, I don't have taste buds, I'm a robot, but you know, I'll keep eating the ice cream because that's what humans do and they like it, you know, I'll pretend I enjoy it. So I think that's fascinating too.
Well, I think
once again it's kind of the
So you the idea that that's kind of maybe the source of his trauma, I guess, there, because as they mentioned, he was in the war, but he didn't fight the war. Yeah. He was brought in as the peace ambassador. So he doesn't have the trauma of war that everyone else has, but the idea that maybe because he's made to look like a small boy and all of that, and the way he's treated and looked at, and maybe this underlying trauma of being rejected for not being, again, wanting to be a real boy, the Pinocchio thing. And that's his drive there, which is maybe why someone like Gazette and everyone else doesn't understand why he would eat the ice cream and all that, because they're trying to cope with their humanity or their robotness in different ways, because the source of their original sin, their source of their problem is something that's different. You know, Adam doesn't have that. Adam is left with this idea of wanting to be, like, explicitly wanting to be human almost, as opposed to, I think, the other seven who are totally content being robots but just living their lives, and they happen to be doing things that humans do. Yeah. You know, I don't think I don't think we're supposed to look at someone like Brando and being like, oh, Brando was trying to be human. No, I think he was totally fine being a robot, being a wrestler. He just happened to find what he wanted in his life was having a family, not because he wanted to be human and humans have families, but because that's where he found happiness. But I think Adam is kind of set up like he is trying to be a real boy. He's trying to be human. That's like his main motivation. I think we see that that's where the ice cream comes from, the bathroom trips come from, and all that. He mentions seeing the young boy about his age with the like mini drone or whatever, you know, and they have like, well, boys that are my age want that thing, so I should want enjoyment out of that. You know, this is what I'm supposed to do. This would, if I were a boy, this is the thing that I would want to do. And that's like his drive, outside of whatever his intent is. And of course, we see that he's still a fairly formidable robot detective, investigator, whatever you want to call him. He still has that side of him. On the same time, he's still like a young boy.
Well, even his design in Pluto is, you know, way more human. In Astro Boy, he's still
right. He looks like
a human boy, but he's got, you know, he's wearing basically black underwear and these big goofy red boots, right? That's clear that's not just a person walking around. Here he's got a raincoat. He's wearing like a pair of jeans. You know, this is just, he's a kid walking down the street. You know, it's pretty fun.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll say, I mean, like, I think we've proven that Pluto is fertile ground for discussion. Like, there's so much more to talk about, and most of these themes we continue to build on. So we're by no means giving the final word on them. But to me, the most fun thing in the entire 2 volumes is in chapter 9 when Adam is at the crime scene, and it was just like, man, if you're like a Sherlock Holmes fan, this is just next level awesome, because he's listening to them make bigoted comments about robots and how robots, you know, they don't appreciate this, they don't have feelings, whatever. And he's like, oh, well, did you notice that there are these 2 cups of tea here? And that they were sitting out here admiring flowers? Like, so it couldn't have been a robot killer, right? If he was admiring flowers, robots don't do that. You wouldn't serve a robot tea, would you? And like, he just absorbs it in the moment, but he just loads the chamber. And as soon as he starts discovering, clues that everybody else missed, and then they all flee to someone described the American media as like watching a kid's soccer game where just everyone swarms the ball. Like no one's playing the field. Everyone just clusters around the ball all the time. That's what human cops look like compared to like Adam and Gazeke. But Adam in particular is having fun with it. Gazeke kind of has the humble servant attitude, whereas Adam's like a little cheekier with it.
Well, I don't know. Is that how we were supposed to read that, where he's being kind of passive aggressive? Or
I don't even think it's. I think he's having fun. Like I don't think he's trying to wound them. Okay. I think he's like having a good old time with this.
Okay, all right.
I didn't take him as like snarky.
So you read it that way, Cole? Because I didn't. I actually read it not as being snarky. I read it out of like almost pure innocence, where he's asking questions,
genuine question, which like would shame them even more.
Yes, right? Like he's not trying. He wasn't trying to show them up. Like if I were to do that, it would be out of total snark and be like, "Oh, really? There's 2 cups of coffee here. Would you serve that to a robot?"
But the thing is, Adam knows that robots do take cups of tea.
Yes,
he just had a cup of tea, or is about to.
Yeah, that's true. But is it? I still, man, maybe that's just the way he's drawn.
He's spinning their bias against them.
Maybe, but maybe I'm doing the same thing that humans in the story do to Adam, which is you just view him as a child. And so you view him as a pure, innocent soul. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I read that was that his intent was purely informational. Like, these are the questions you should ask based on the evidence that's here, that he was actually being purely analytical. Maybe I read that. Maybe it is him being. No,
I mean, this is going to be a really fun line reading in the anime because the actor will have a lot of say in his character with one line reading.
The intonation will tell you what you can, because
is it innocent?
Each of us are going to intone those lines differently as we read them. So to see what an actor interprets will be interesting, because I didn't read it as him being playful or snarky, anything like that. I read it as pure innocence, and again, maybe that's my bias and looking at.
Well, no, but I queued it up. I queued it up for myself by comparing it to Sherlock Holmes. To come into a crime scene, other people have already contaminated, and you're still catching things that they missed, and all of the meaning is in the missed things. So.
But that idea
is the Sherlock behavior. I also adapted the Sherlock attitude and imposed that on
him walking in. Sherlock is always going to walk in knowing he's the smartest person in the room, and is going to tell you he's the smartest person in the room. He's going to show you he's the smartest person in the room,
and shame you for what you missed.
Yeah, I didn't graft that onto Adam there. But again,
that was probably wise of you not to. Like, as you're talking, I'm thinking I'm more and more wrong about this.
I will say Adam, he, even in Astro Boy, plays it pretty straight. He's not super jokey, right? He's pretty genuine. So you might have the correct read on that.
That comes down to the idea of the innocent boy, the robot. Then he's naive. Mm-hmm. He knows everything, but he doesn't know emotion. Can't read people. There's a lot,
and he wants to be liked.
Yeah,
and I think that's the thing that I was probably missing. Because everything he does is to be accepted and liked by humans, because his whole life is based on rejection. And Sherlock Holmes does not care if anyone likes him.
No, he does not.
And the type of detective I'm thinking of is the, patronizing, dismissive, rude, abrasive, but gets the job done, House MD style guy. And I think there's nothing in the story to tell us that Adam is that kind of guy. So, it probably makes for a more entertaining podcast if I double down on my wrongness, but I just can't in this case. I'll try to find something else to double down on.
Plant your flag somewhere else. Sure.
But so anything else you guys want to discuss about 1 and 2? I realize we're probably already a little longer than we planned to go, but
shocking.
I know
I would do that.
I know, but for 1 and 2 to get off the ground, I think it probably just took a little bit more. I think we'll be to an hour in the future for 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. But anything else? I guess there's one last character on the last page that who by the way, is a non-Astro Boy reader. These are all new characters to me, but it's Uran.
Yeah. Uran,
Or-
Uran,
yeah, or
something like
yeah,
that.
you're on, or yeah. I think that's one of those things. We kind of said that if you don't know the Astro Boy story, all you need to know that Astro Boy is a thing that exists, and it's very clear that all you have to do is accept that you live in a world. You're reading a world where humans and robots exist together, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
But it's clear with that reveal that like, oh, that's supposed to be somebody.
That's a known character. Yeah.
And
you could play the Avengers Endgame reaction sound where the guy says, "Let's go." I'm sure there's some big Uran fan out there who at the end of that chapter was like, "Yeah,
100%
good stuff."
Yeah. I would imagine if you are an Astro Boy reader, in your mind, you probably have a checklist of things. Like as I'm reading this story, obviously it starts off and you're like, okay, well, first off, when does Adam show up? And then, okay, there he is. And then you're probably marking down through and be like, okay, well, Uran's got to be here somewhere, and then you get that reveal at the end of it. It's like, okay, boom, here we go. You're, as an Astro Boy fan, you're waiting for these things to happen. And it's just a matter of when they're deployed. So yeah, you don't have to know anything about that. You don't know anything who she is, because then you have to trust, as a reader, you have to trust that you'll be told who she is. The whole point is just the reveal. And all you have to recognize is that the reveal is important for someone. Maybe not you yet, but you don't frame it in that way if this person is not going to be important, or if this person isn't someone who is important, to the overall story. You just don't know it yet. So yeah, you got to trust, as a new reader coming in, you got to trust that Urasawa knows what he's doing. Right. Yeah.
Well, that excited person at the Uran reveal was me. She's a huge part of the original Astro Boy story. So it's interesting how she's utilized in this. She's kind of a big deal in the original one. So like seeing her finally crop up in, she looks adorable too, right? She's got a striped shirt, like the little overalls and stuff. Like, her design is great.
And we see her immediately like commune with animals.
Yeah.
Right. So before so I guess then at that point, if you know what's coming, you see this little girl walk up to these tigers or whatnot. And so you know what the reveal is going to be. But my limited knowledge of of the character in Astro Boy is like, that's one of her things, right? Her ability to communicate and commune with animals. And so to have her introduction explicitly be that, and then have the reveal of who she is. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a setup there. You're told things about the character before you even know who she is and why she's important.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've really liked about these two volumes too, is these kind of end of volume character reveals. I think are great. They're they're a little corny, but like you get Adam right there in the last chapter, volume 1. You're on here at the last chapter, volume 2. It's great, right? It's like a little treat before going to the next one. It's
you're calling it corny, but this is like a staple of Western comics.
I was going to say there's
this is why every Marvel scene has a credit scene.
Yeah. There's no judgment on this side of the aisle, because the whole idea is when you're reading a Western comic, the last page is a left-handed page, typically, almost always, and it's a single splash, and then other side is either the back cover or an ad or whatnot, or credits.
And it's frequently a new character walking in.
Yeah, and so there's always that last page. You turn, you read left, right, you turn, and whatever that page is on the left there, that's your final page. That's going to be some reveal, and a lot of times, it's a new character. It's the voiceover you've been hearing for the last 4 or 5 pages. It's the villain or whatnot. So So
I love how Cole's like, it's a little corny. And Alex and I are like, well, that's where we felt at home.
Yeah, I'm expecting that.
It was a warm nest for me.
Yeah.
It's like, oh boy, we get to and like strategically, just the way it played out in trades. That's a pretty great way to make me spend the next $12.99. That's the last page of the book. Followed with there's a nice letter from Urasawa in the back of these.
Oh yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Well, I think this manga is particularly easy to read too. Like, it's a pretty dense story. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of dialogue, but it's very quick. You can blaze through these chapters. There really aren't appreciate.
Long.
We talked about
panels.
Yeah, I was gonna say we talked about Death Note a little earlier. That one, some of those pages can be arduous. You're spending a lot of time there. It's like, all right, we've been reading this for a while now, just kind of like churning through it over and over and over. it's like chewing on like a bad piece of steak. But these Pluto ones, you're cruising right through.
Yeah, I think the story is it's efficiently told and presented, and I think again that goes to a mark of a skilled storyteller. Again, whether any sort of sequential art storytelling, whether we're talking Japanese style or even East Asian style versus Western comics, you have to understand what the pacing is that you're pulling out there, knowing that the reader can go at their own pace. They can read everything first. They can look at just the art first, or whatever. You can go back. You can stay on a page as long as you want. But how you move down and across the page, whether it's right to left or left to right, that is left to the reader. And so, as a storyteller, how you dole that information out, how you parcel it out, how you frame the panels, what you put in them, all of that. When a book reads like this, I think it shows a level of understanding of the craft, a level of understanding of how the reader is going to approach it, that allows it to move very quickly, but yet you don't feel like you've lost anything. It moves very quickly through there, but you don't feel like you're just breezing past things that don't matter. You can take in everything that's happening in the story, but yeah, you're not spending a minute or so, several minutes on a page trying to like dissect everything that's going on in one panel or two panels, something like that. You can get through it very quickly and still absorb the story the way you're supposed to.
Yeah. Well, that's all I've got for this one. You guys good till volumes 3 and 4?
Yeah, I think so. I do have one final shot at the end here because I told him I would do it.
Right.
These guys want to see. I was on my phone a little earlier because it's not video, you can't tell. But I was texting with my brother because I had some questions about him. Because the idea of me specifically talking about any sort of manga is fairly hilarious. I've never been a manga reader. I have nothing against it.
Every time you just glaze over every time I talk to you about it.
It's not my thing. And so my brother, who's older than me, he was into it big, manga and anime back 25, 30 years ago when you couldn't find this stuff. For any youngsters out there listening, you can go to Barnes and Noble now and get like shelves and shelves and shelves of this stuff.
Target, yeah.
Yeah, you can, obviously every streaming service, whatever, has got original anime and all this stuff there. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, you couldn't find any of this stuff. And my brother was at the heart of this when this little thing called the internet came up, and you could buy stuff from all over the world and pay exorbitant prices for badly dubbed VHS tapes of anime. Okay. And this is what he was doing back in the mid 90s or whatnot. And to the point where, I don't know, we all live in the Ohio Valley area, Midwest area. Anyone in this general Midwest area has heard of Anime Central, ASEN, which is a huge anime con in Chicago. My brother knew the people who started that. He was friends with them in the late 90s when that started. And so he was real big into it. And I think it was part of my thing of why I wasn't into it. It was that's his thing. And so I never read anime back then. And then it kind of became a larger bit of just I don't read it because I'm Korean and I don't recognize the work of the colonizers. And so how much of that's true or how much of it's a bit, I don't know if it's just a work or whatnot, but it never appealed to me. And also, as we kind of maybe we're talking about, I spend enough money on Western comics. I read so much of that they're I only have so much bandwidth for anything else. And so the idea that I'd be talking about an anime or just talking about a manga, and at this point too, now that I've read it, I will watch the Netflix anime. I will absolutely do that.
Oh, I mean, have you seen the trailer?
I did watch the trailer actually after
unbelievably
I
cool. Yeah.
After I finished the two volumes. So when I finish this, I will watch it there, but I do want to shout out my brother Tony. The idea that I would be talking about any sort of manga, I'm sure is hilarious to him, and he will get a kick out of this when it drops. So
yeah, well, now I'm worried that he's going to correct us over Twitter or wherever, because
no
things we missed, things we got wrong, certainly pronunciations.
He won't correct you. He'll just bombard me with text, and I'll get them in real time as he listens to the episode. This is what I get from him. That I know when he started listening, because I'll get out of context texts from him, and I'll have to remember what it is I said on the podcast, because sometimes you record them, you like this one, maybe some weeks in advance, and I'll just get something out of the blue, and I'll be like, wait, did I say that? Is that what it was? I don't remember. I don't remember here. So, but yeah, that's how I know where he is. And so when we get to this, I'm sure I will get a long deluge of a barrage of text from him telling me probably what we got wrong. But it'll only come to me, so don't worry about it. You guys will be spared.
That's great. Yeah. Well, plus we'll have recorded another one or two by then, and it's way too late to correct things for 1 and 2.
Yeah.
By the way, you get a lot of that on Tankobon, like people shouting you out in the comments.
Not really. Not really with like corrections. We'll get people that, there will be some like popular series that Jude and I kind of rag on. We're not really feeling, and then we'll get
the fans of that one.
Well, we'll put the episode out, and then they'll be like, "Yeah, I love this chapter this week." I was like, maybe skip that part of the episode where we talk about how much we didn't like that.
Yeah,
one.
no, I do think there is one that you guys scared me off of when you were whining about some of the exposition dumps in Death Note. You compared it to Hunter x Hunter, which was on my list. And I was like, as I was grinding through those rough parts of Death Note, I was like, I don't know if I can do Hunter x Hunter if it's like this. Yeah. I was like, maybe I'll just watch the anime to get the gist of it. But
well, I will say with Hunter x Hunter, that's my recommendation. I, love the manga, but near the end it gets it's
bogged down. Yeah.
Yep.
Struggling under its own weight.
Endings are hard. Mike and I talk all the time. What your story you're telling is, if you go on long enough, it's hard to wrap things up. So I'm not surprised that carries over into Eastern comics as well.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Storied Arcs Tankobon I was going to say confederation, and I was like, why would I use that word?
Crossover?
Crossover. There it is. That's a comic-y word.
Yeah.
We'll just clean that up and post along with everything else. Thank you for listening. You can find us at Storied Arcs on Instagram and whatever Twitter's called now and wherever else. StoriedArcs.com. You can also find Tankobon there. Tankoban.
BON.
BON. And you guys have a website as well.
No, we just have I think it's at Tankobon Podcast on Instagram and Twitter, and we've got like a link tree that has sort of like where you can
find them on Instagram.
Yeah.
Find them on Instagram. You can find them everywhere else, and we will link in the show description as well. Other than that, read Pluto 3 and 4. Enjoy it, and we will see you next week.
Peace.